Our Pennsylvania wildlife rely on clean and accessible waterways, yet many of Indiana County's creeks and rivers carry harmful contaminants, and thick stands of non-native plants crowd out and bar easy access to stream banks. But is this such a big deal? After all, won't our wildlife adapt as they have for millions of years? Doesn't water do a good job diluting toxic inputs? Who cares if one little beetle disappears from the ecological web? And how can we possibly hope to rewind and correct years of seemingly irreversible damage to our waterways anyhow? We asked these questions to several Indiana County experts who are involved in some of our biggest water cleanup projects and the biological indicators that tell us just where we are in our efforts. We'll start with Olivia Weaver. Weaver is a geologist at Hedden Environmental, and she's been part of a years-long project involving long days in the field sampling water around western Pennsylvania, including our own Yellow and Tulip creeks. Here's Weaver giving some context behind acid mine drainage, or AMD, one of our county's biggest challenges in keeping our waterways healthy.
Abandoned mine drainage technically is originating from mines, and it could be either a deep mine, so a mine that's underneath the ground, or from surface mining, so where they'll strip some cover off of the coal and then just strip the coal straight off the top of the surface. And water will infiltrate into the mines, either surface or deep mines, and once the water comes in contact with the coal and even the surrounding rocks above and below the coal, usually there's pyrite in the coal, which will contribute iron and sulfides to the water, and there's a lot of different metals and a lot of geochemistry happening there that then creates acid mine drainage or abandoned mine drainage, and that then gets into the streams through various either abandoned entries or abandoned boreholes, wherever the water pops out at. So when I'm out in the field, I will, depending, like in the case of the watershed assessment for Tulip Creek, I have a sampling plan that I've looked at mapping and historic data and things like that, and I usually try to bracket sections of the stream to narrow down where is the pollution coming from, where do I think there's discharges, or where do I know they are, and so then I'll have that on my list of samples. So when I'm sampling, I know I have a goal of what I'm going out there for, and usually, like when I would get to a spot, I have a meter that I can measure pH, conductivity, and the temperature of the water with, and I also will measure flow. Flow is super important in what we do. Like when designing these systems, the key thing that you need is to know how much of the water are we dealing with. It's important to know the chemistry, but if you don't know how much of it, then you can't size anything. The sampling itself is fairly simple. You just collect the water in a bottle, and usually you have to acidify it to fix the metals in solution and then send it off to a lab. The majority of the work I do, though, is using the data that I collect from the field to then make inferences about, okay, what's going on in the stream? Is the stream polluted from AMD? Sometimes I'll look at it and I'll be like, there's really not a lot of metals here, so it's doing fine, But other times I'm like, okay, there's a problem from here to here in the stream, and that's because this tributary is coming in or this discharge is coming in. And then I have to figure out, do I need to monitor it more, or where is this coming from? And I'll look into the history of the mining in the area and the geology, figure out where the coal is and if it was deep mine, surface mine. And then at the end of it all, we have to come up with a plan. Usually we'll have recommendations and try to figure out what's the best way to move forward based on the data that I've collected in the field.
To oversimplify, the amount of flow in a river might mean that the presence of otherwise harmful chemicals might not be such a big deal. Essentially, the water dilutes the concentration of metals over a stretch of the waterway. But have enough toxic chemicals belching out of a mine borehole, for example, well then people like Weaver have a concern.
It's a problem because this water sometimes it's acidic, so the pH will be like 3 to 5, and it will have a lot of aluminum and iron. Sometimes it's more alkaline, which is meaning the pH is higher, and there's usually more iron with it. But all these metals, the fish and the macroinvertebrates in the streams can't tolerate the metals coming in contact with them, living in the water and having it pollute their environment. So usually the fish will die, their food, the macroinvertebrates will die. So it's a huge problem, and particularly in western Pennsylvania, in the bituminous coal region, which is where we're located at, because we have such an extensive history of mining, and abandoned mining in particular is from pre-1977, which is when more strict laws went in to help protect and keep these mining companies accountable for this.
When you're splashing around in a stream, you might not notice these sensitive macroinvertebrates Weaver mentioned. Rebecca Caldwell, with the Indiana County Conservation District, has encountered these tiny scorpion-like critters countless times while taking water samples of impaired streams across the county. She explained what these macros are and their importance to our local ecology.
So one of the other things that we look for whenever we are doing stream sampling are macroinvertebrates. Macroinvertebrates are basically little insects and bugs that you see in the stream. They are an important bioindicator to the stream health, which basically indicates how healthy or unhealthy a stream is. Some of the macros that you will see in a stream that indicates that they are healthy are caddisfly, dragonflies, Dobson flies. Those are all great indicators of stream health. Some of the ones that you will see more of in an unhealthy stream are flatworms, leeches, and those kind of insects, snails as well. So you'll mostly see macroinvertebrates in the stream, mostly under rocks. We use items called kick nets, where you can collect the macros and you can identify them and count how many you see. So the more caddisflies, Dobson flies, stoneflies, mayflies that you see, the better the stream health will be.
Some macros, like mayflies, spend up to 2 years as aquatic larvae. Then they crawl out of the stream, shed their larval skin, and become airborne with their newly developed wings. As the order of this insect group suggests, Ephemeroptera, they live only for a few hours or days, losing the ability to eat so that they can focus all their energy into finding a mate. It might surprise some to know that one of our most iconic insects also rely on not just clean waterways, but native streamside plants. Fireflies, or as I called them growing up, lightning bugs. Dr. John Wenzel, Executive Director of the Conemaugh Valley Conservancy, explains why non-native riparian vegetation, or plants along a watercourse, are so vital to one of our most beloved flying beetles.
So invasive species often have a devastating impact, and usually it has to do with the exact habitat that that species is moving into. If you consider some of the most disastrous ones, I would say one that probably almost everybody knows is Japanese knotweed, which is propagating everywhere, especially along watercourses. So right now, the banks of our streams and rivers are turning into a pure stand of Japanese knotweed that's so dense that our native vegetation can't get up through that. And of course, the animals that use the edge of the river course, it's a totally different river course now, and maybe the plants they're looking for food aren't there, or even just passage itself becomes difficult in knotweed. And in many cases, these invasive plants are devastating to a certain habitat. Fireflies, we call them periaquatic. They live around the edges of water primarily, not all of them, but most of them do. And as larvae, as immatures, they feed on snails and worms and things that they find in the mud. And then as adults, it's the form that we're all familiar with, a flying beetle that flies around. They're often nocturnal, and some of them flash. Many fireflies don't flash. Some are diurnal. But if you change the riverbank completely so it's under a closed canopy of knotweed, I should imagine that that's going to change the opportunities for snails and worms and then for fireflies.
An absence of terrestrial insects along our waterways can have significant impacts to the critters in our streams, too. After an invasive plant removal event along the Hoodelbrug Trail between Indiana and Homer City, Ed Donnelly took a break to talk about the detrimental effect of unwanted streamside plants on our fish population.
So a group did a study in West Virginia where they looked at what trout were feeding on in streams, and during the summer, spring, summer, and fall, 75% of their diet was terrestrial insects. So insects that had fallen into the stream. And that means that the surrounding vegetation surrounding the stream needs to support insects. And most plants have chemical defenses against insects. And insects have adapted to that and worked around it. Think of the monarch butterfly and milkweed. The milkweed's toxic, but the caterpillars of monarch butterflies have worked around it. Well, 90% of caterpillar species are that way. They're specialists. And so if you have an invasive plant along your stream, it's unlikely that native insects will be adapted to feed on the leaves of those, and so they won't be falling into the stream to feed the trout. Whereas if you have native plants, there'll be lots of insects along there. For example, viburnum shrubs, which there are some species that like wet stream edges, they support over 115 species of caterpillars, of native caterpillars. So if those caterpillars are feeding on the viburnum leaves overhanging the stream, some of them will fall into it and feed the trout.
Donley might seem like an unlikely environmentalist. He was professor of mathematics at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, later finding an interest in birding, a hobby that eventually comes for us all. When he's not hosting invasive plant removal events with Plant Patrol, he's at home creating the ideal habitat for migrating birds, one species of which was virtually wiped out by industry and development, and the impact of both on waterways here in Indiana County.
There's a duck called common merganser. There are 3 species of mergansers in Pennsylvania. One of them just migrates through and 2 of them breed here. The larger one is called a common merganser. It's much bigger than a mallard duck, but smaller than a goose. And it lives on lakes and rivers generally. It'll nest in lots of different places, wherever it can find a nesting cavity. And although they'll also occasionally nest on the ground. They eat fish. And so when all of our streams were polluted 100 years ago, there was nothing for them to eat here. They were pretty much extirpated, which means they were locally extinct from Pennsylvania. And they also like forested areas, and of course Pennsylvania was almost clear-cut up to 100 years ago. And so they didn't have the habitat they liked, they didn't have any food, and they just weren't here. And they started to come back. And the reason? Because the forests have come back and we're cleaning up the streams so they can fish.
Donley did mention that some aren't so keen on the bird's rebound, as it competes with fishermen for trout fishing. Regardless, signs of returning wildlife, native birds, tiny insects, river otters even, are a promising sign. Seeing so much orange sludge coating our stream beds and knotweed suffocating our native plants can be disheartening, especially if you're not paying attention to the proverbial canaries in the coal mine. And Indiana County is slowly but surely rewinding years of damage as we continue to find a balance between the needs of nature and our own way of life. That's all for this episode. Keep an eye on our Spotify channel for some of our full-length interviews and our social media and YouTube pages for video versions. And as always, a shout out to one of our favorite local bands, Mountain Meets the Moon Band, for providing our intro and outro music. We'll be posting links so you can follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube and catch them wherever they're playing live next. And thanks to you for listening, whether you're local or just passing through. Be sure to check back for more Conservation Conversations episodes that highlight what's happening in Indiana County, Pennsylvania.